I'm pleased to start off this segment on entrepreneurship survival by introducing you to Gary Bohamed. Gary is the current CEO of EMBO LLC, and we're going to talk to him a little bit about his career and the other startups he's been working in, and specifically address what it means to inspire others and build that team of yours. So Gary, my first question for you isn't much of a question. I'd like to know a little bit more how you got into healthcare.
Sure. And Dr. Lam, thank you for having me participate in this. It's a very exciting program. So how did I get started in healthcare? Well, you're taking me back 30 plus years. So you're testing my memory early. It's actually an interesting story. I was attending Pepperdine University, getting my master's degree. And a little bit about my background. My family was lower to middle income. We didn't have a lot of resources and a lot of funds, so I had to pay for my own education. And after Cal Poly, I worked a little bit, and then I went and started my MBA. And I became a graduate assistant as part of earning money. And one of my assignments was to work in the career development office. And one day, the director of the career development office, her name was Linda, she stepped out for lunch and she said, "Gary, can you man the phones while I'm at lunch?" And I, of course, said yes. So while she was gone, we got a call from a gentleman named John Denny, who was the president of a company called Quality Medical Management. And he asked for Linda. She's out to lunch. So I took a message. He was looking for a student. He said a bright student that could do a salary survey for his company. So I took the message and continued with my duties. When Linda returned from lunch, she of course asked if there were any messages. I said yes. John Denny called from Quality Medical Management, and he would like me to do a salary survey for his company. And she knew right away that he didn't specifically ask for me, but she said, "He didn't really ask for you, did he?" And I said, "Well, he said a very smart student, and I'm a very smart student. So I think he was talking about me." So that actually started my career. I ended up doing the salary survey for Quality Medical Management. And as a result of the study, they ended up offering me a position, and that started my career in healthcare.
So it sounds like to me your introduction to healthcare was helping this company find value within its organization. Did that particular task turn into a full-time position with that company?
It did. It turned into a full-time position, initially as a human resource manager, but we were a very small company with limited resources. So we wore many hats. Everyone wore many hats. So I began doing contracting with physicians for providing medical services to our patients, services that we could not provide in-house. We would have to refer the patient out to a specialist. So I did those contracts with the specialists, and that sort of launched my career into the management of medical groups and the development of medical groups. So I stayed with the company for 2 years, at which time they were bought. There was a series of acquisitions during the 90s in healthcare, and that led to several different positions with several different companies by way of acquisition.
So fast forward a few years, you strike out on your own and create Independence Medical Group. When you started Independence Medical Group, who joined you in this adventure?
Yeah, at the time I was recruited to join a physician whose name is Dr. Johnson Tjong. And I can actually trace back to my very first position with Quality Medical Management, how I built that relationship with Dr. Tjong. But that's a story for another day. Dr. Tjong reached out to me while I was working for a company, a very large medical group, very profitable, very reputable. And he offered me an entrepreneurial position with his company. He had sold his previous company and he started a new one, and he wanted me to come and join him and build a medical group. And the problem was it was in Bakersfield. I lived in the San Fernando Valley, which is about an 80-mile drive one way. I also was expecting my first child, And I also had purchased my first home. And oh, by the way, Dr. Tjong's offer was substantially less money than I was earning at my current position. So it was a risky move, but I took it. And that was my first venture into entrepreneurship. And the story I tell is my very first day on the job. We were a very small medical group. I didn't have an office. I shared an office with a physician, but when the physician was seeing patients in the patient room, in the exam room, I would sit at his desk and get work done. Well, I showed up at 8 o'clock in the morning. I sat at the doctor's desk, and I was reviewing information on the medical group to get familiar with it. And Dr. Tjong showed up at around 10 o'clock in the morning, and he sees me sitting at the desk. And he says, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm pretty sure you hired me to work here." He said, "I didn't hire you to sit at a desk. I hired you to build a medical group. Now get the hell out of here." And that was my introduction to entrepreneurship. I knew nothing gets built sitting at a desk. You have to get out. You have to meet people. You have to shake their hands. You have to introduce yourself to them. You have to build brick by brick. And that was my very rude awakening into the world of entrepreneurship. That was in the year 2000. And by the time we built Independence Medical Group to its $100 million stature, that was 14 years after that.
So you started off with Dr. Tjong and yourself. Who else was part of this? And how big was the group when you first started, and what kinds of personalities were there?
When we started, it was me and Dr. Tjong. That's it. I learned that one of my tenets is I don't believe in if you build it, they will come. We didn't hire a bunch of people. We rolled up our sleeves and we did the work ourselves. And we didn't hire one other person until we absolutely had to. And that wasn't until 3 years down the line. We would share staff between one of his other businesses. We would borrow staff if there was clerical functions or telephone calls that needed to be followed up on. But in terms of the building phase for the first 3 years, we didn't hire anybody. We did it ourselves. But then after that, once we got to a size that we needed to get staff on board, we hired a couple of people and we subcontracted out for certain services, which is common in the medical industry.
That's a very interesting choice that was made to make sure you had the work in place before you had the employees to bring in. And I'm curious, did the new employees that got brought in, did they seem ready and willing to adapt to that approach as well? Or did they take some relationship building to make them effective in your company?
It was a struggle, to be honest, Dr. Lamb. Entrepreneurs are difficult to find. They're difficult to breed. And it took some trial and error. We hired and we fired. I was, call me at the time a highly compensated executive, rolling up my sleeves, doing anything I needed to do to build a business. Whether that was making phone calls, whether that was making my own copies, whether that was working till all hours of the night, whatever it took, there was no selfishness involved. It was all about how do you build the company. And finding employees and partners that share that vision was very difficult. So we did have very high turnover early on until we, found ways to weed through and get excellent people with the same vision.
You mentioned that you got to a point where you got big enough to bring on more people when you went to scale the business. Did you find it easier then to bring more people on as the roles got more established and there was an established company culture?
I wouldn't say it was easier. No. In fact, I would say it was more difficult as we grew from a zero revenue company to, say, let's call it a $60 million company covering 2 counties in Central California, which is huge. Kern County in and of itself would be the it would be the 10th largest state in the United States. It's a huge territory. So we had people all over the place. We had a huge territory to cover, and hiring people to cover that territory and to perform the functions, no, it was quite difficult. I wouldn't say it got easier as it went on. It actually got more difficult. But once we identified keepers, folks who shared our vision, folks who worked as hard as we did, when I would send an email or a text at 10 o'clock at night and I would get a response at 10:15 at night, I knew I had someone that had the character that matches my work ethic. Then we held on to them with, kid gloves and made sure they were properly compensated, very well compensated, got annual bonuses, etc.
So I think you may have answered this question, but are there other actions that you took to ensure that the new people you were bringing into the company didn't alter the culture, but help grow the business the way that you had planned out?
Yeah, and that's the way. I never stopped working for the 16 years I was building and then ultimately selling Independence Medical Group. I never stopped working. If there was something that had to be done, I did it, and that culture had to be in all of my staff. And I'll give you an example of a situation. So we had a patient that was on dialysis, end-stage renal disease. And dialysis patients have to have dialysis 3 times a week. They have to, or they will get very sick and end up in an emergency room. And that is very expensive and not the quality care that we wanted to deliver. So one of our patients was in a city called Ridgecrest. Ridgecrest is in the middle of nowhere. And the closest dialysis center was in Tehachapi, which is at least an hour drive. The patient had, we actually arranged for that patient a transportation service to pick the patient up 3 times a week, take them to dialysis, have their treatment for 3 to 4 hours, and then take them back home. Well, the person that was on duty that day couldn't come, so they couldn't get to the patient for dialysis. So we learned this. I put a message out to my team, basically saying patient so-and-so needs to get their dialysis there in Ridgecrest, and they need to get to Tehachapi. Within 15 minutes, I got 3 of my staff members and 1 manager volunteer to drive to Ridgecrest to pick that patient up and get them to Tehachapi. Now, I'm sure this broke every rule in our contract with the health plans. I'm sure it violated our insurance coverage. Maybe, I don't know. I didn't care. I just had to know, I knew that I had to get that patient to their dialysis or they could suffer horrible consequences. And that's the culture that we built. And I was very proud that we did.
Given what you've shared with me, what does teamwork mean to you?
So I think the best way I would describe teamwork is giving you the antithesis of teamwork, and that would be selfishness. Selfishness cannot survive in a team environment. You all got to be rowing the boat in the same direction at the same pace, and your leaders will get you in the proper direction as long as everyone's rowing in the same direction. You get someone on the left side of the boat not doing their job or doing it however the heck they want to do it, you're going to get off course and you're not going to reach your goals. So, not sure that was a good answer to your question, Dr. Lamb, but selfishness is the evil of teamwork.
I actually think that's a great answer.
Thank you.
When you made your exit from Independence Medical Group, you started this new venture that you're in now. What were some of the lessons that you're taking with you from that experience into this current experience?
Yes, that's a great question. And I think about it a lot. I knew that I was done with Independence Medical Group because we built it to a size that it could be sold, and it was sold. Shortly after I left Independence Medical Group, and I call that my retirement, Dr. Tjong passed away with lung cancer. So that was very devastating to me. But I'll never forget what a compassionate physician he was and what a hardworking entrepreneur he was. But in the end, what made him the proudest was that we were taking care of people. We were serving people. We were delivering healthcare to people who could least afford it. Most of our patients were on Medi-Cal or Medicaid. It's Medicaid in 49 states, it's Medi-Cal in California. It's basically health insurance provided by the state with the support of the federal government for people who are the most needy. And he was very proud of that. And oh, by the way, we were very successful. And oh, by the way, we did very well financially. But what made him proudest was we were taking care of people. So I took that into my business. Any project that I got involved with, or any project I wanted to get involved with or to start, had to be to make the world better and to make money. And with very few exceptions, that's what I've done. And that I bring with me, and the team that I surround myself with. We just had a retreat a few months ago to keep us all on track. That's what our focus is, to make the lives of people better and make money.
Well, I sincerely appreciate your answers and the time that you took today. Those are all the questions that I have, and I think that I've certainly learned a lot from hearing your stories and the responses you've given. Thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you, Dr. Lam, and best of luck to everybody.
Our next guest brings to the table both her experience as an entrepreneur herself, as well as someone who's helping innovators and inventors protect their ideas. Elizabeth Yang is the founder of Yang Law Offices and comes to us from her office in Los Angeles today. Now, my first question for you, Elizabeth, is you started off your career as an electrical engineer working for a large defense contractor, and then you transitioned to opening your own law practice. Can you tell us a bit about what motivated you to make that transition?
Absolutely. And thanks again for having me on here, Kenneth. When I was an engineer, I actually didn't realize that electrical engineers were such a high demand in the field of law, especially in the area of intellectual property. So in intellectual property law, attorneys are assisting inventors in acquiring patents, trademarks, and copyrights to protect their ideas. In order to understand some of these complex inventions, it's very helpful to have an engineering background. And, when I went to law school, I was not planning on becoming an attorney. I was interested in going mainly to get educated on our legal system. But when I graduated, an offer just fell into my lap because the IP world was high in demand looking for electrical engineering attorneys. And I didn't realize how valuable my background would be to me. And thus it was a very natural transition.
So your first position after transitioning from engineering into law was helping people protect their ideas?
Exactly. Yep. I specialized solely in intellectual property when I first came out of law school.
Do you remember some of your early clients? What were some of the ideas you helped protect?
So the first law firm I worked for was actually a very large law firm, and internationally they had over 800 attorneys. And so their clients are big corporations, similar to Qualcomm, big corporations, not individual inventors. And actually, during that time, one of the challenges I faced were that my friends would come to me after learning that I became a patent lawyer and ask me to help them with patenting their inventions. But because I was at a large law firm, their initial retainers were extremely high, ranging from 15,000 to 25,000 at a starting rate. And so that was way too much money for an individual inventor who just has an idea, who hasn't even started profiting from it yet. So I had to turn away a lot of my friends and refer them to smaller firms. Now, with my own practice, I can take on clients of any size. They don't have to pay a hefty retainer in order to use my services.
That was going to be my next question, because it appears that you opened your own law firm to help your friends and other inventors who couldn't afford the big law firm retainers.
Yes, that was one main reason. But another reason why I started my own practice was for work-life balance. So at the large law firms, even though they pay really good money, they are basically treating their employees like slaves. I was working over 80 hours a week and had to be available on weekends and evenings, pretty much at the mercy of partners that I was working for. I ended up having my children a few years after I started working there. And during the first year after my daughter was born, she was practically raised by my nanny, and I barely got to see her. I would go to work very early in the morning. It would be very late by the time I came home from work, and she'd be sleeping already. So I told myself, I'm not going to let this continue on and have my daughter think that a nanny is her mother. So I ended up coming out on my own and being my own boss. I love having the flexibility to set my own hours, to set my own appointments with clients so that they don't interfere with the times where I dedicate to my children. I can pick them up, drop them off at school, take them to extracurricular activities if needed, and still be able to assist my clients during the times that don't conflict with their schedules. So it's a win-win situation.
You started your law firm by on practicing intellectual property, and now your law firm offers more services. Can you tell us what other services you offer, and then what led you to expand into those areas?
Absolutely. So I started off as an IP attorney, and because I had also gotten my MBA at the same time that I got my JD degree, I was able to also assist clients in the area of business law. That includes drafting business contracts, setting up new entities, assisting them with any business disputes or litigation. So business law was the natural expansion on top of IP law. About 5 years into my law practice, I actually went through my own divorce with my ex-husband, and we were only married for a short 1.5 years, but our divorce ended up taking 4 years. And it led me to learn about what a difficult and complicated system the divorce courts entail. And so during those 4 years, it was like a 4-year education for me in the area of family law. And I got very knowledgeable about child custody issues, child support issues, spousal support issues. And during my own divorce, I went through 5 different law firms. Between me and him, we spent almost $500,000 on attorney fees. And so I came out of that experience realizing that I can use my knowledge and my wisdom that I've learned from that challenging time to help other clients who are going through a divorce process or a child custody battle. And therefore, it was a natural expansion to add family law into the mix. And then from family law, the newest area is estate planning, because after a divorce, the parties need to reevaluate their assets. Now they have half of the assets they used to have, and so they get to distribute them to new beneficiaries, and so they gotta rewrite their wills, recreate trusts, and we used to refer that service out, but then the demand was so high, we just decided to keep it in-house.
Wow, that's amazing. It's amazing to me how you took this very trying experience and saw how you could become an expert in that area and add value to your future clients who might be struggling through similar situations. And I'm also curious at this moment, you started to bring in new people to expand those services. Did that create any challenges as you're building your team?
Hiring is always a challenge for any business owner. And so finding the right people is always challenging. But fortunately, I've been lucky and I found a lot of good people. And we go along according with the demand of our clients. So in the last year and a half during the pandemic, the demand for family law attorneys has been on the rise. And there's been way more demand for divorce lawyers than for, let's say, IP attorneys. And so all of the new folks that I've been hiring are all family law attorneys and family law legal assistants, because that's where the need is. I don't know if it's because of the quarantine and, couples are spending too much time together or to the point where they can't stand each other. But the divorce rate is definitely climbing, and family law disputes, whether it's getting a restraining order, fighting over child custody, fighting over who's going to get a vaccine, all those things have been real issues that we've had to bring to court.
I see that you're a certified mediator. How does that provide value to your customers?
Mediation is one of the biggest things that our firm encourages our clients to do. And I actually first came across it through my personal divorce. After 4 years of fighting in courts with multiple law firms, our case ended up still settling because we were able to mediate and settle our issues outside of court. That's how we ultimately ended our case. And so I tell my clients, you can either have a judge who is a stranger to your life, someone who has no idea who you are and who your ex-spouse is, and they listen to the facts presented by lawyers in court, and they pretty much get to make decisions that everyone needs to follow every day in their lives. And most of the time, what I've seen is that when a judge makes an order, both parties are not happy. Both parties are unhappy with some portion of that order, if not all of it. So the best thing to retain control is to sit down with the other party, communicate, mediate, and come up with your own terms. Don't leave your life in the hands of a random judge.
You probably answered this question already, but what is a challenge that you see coming up more through the needs and wants of your clients? And what are you hoping to address in the near future?
Yeah, family law has been on the increase, but the other area is in the area of estate planning. So currently, the estate planning, the estate tax, the federal estate tax is at $11.7 million. That means that if someone creates a trust this year and puts up to $11.7 million in that trust, they can gift and will all of those assets to their beneficiaries without having to pay the 40% estate tax. Otherwise, without this estate tax exemption, 40% of anything they will their children goes to the government. That's like almost half of everything they own. The Biden administration is actually considering dropping this 11.7 million exemption back down to 5 million. It was 5 million approximately, maybe like 3 years ago. It got raised in the last few years, but it doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. And so people are rushing to create trust in order to save this $11.7 million and not lose it, because otherwise they're only going to be able to will half of that tax-free, and anything above $5 million, they're going to have to pay 40% taxes on it.
As a patent attorney, you've had the opportunity to work with many different clients and inventors protecting their ideas and starting their businesses. Thinking about them in general, how have you noticed they provide value to their customers?
So in the field of intellectual property, patents can bring tremendous value to a company. There's so many ways to monetize off of a patent. So some of my clients, they'll get patents not because they want to go and sue other companies, but because they want to defend themselves. They don't want to be the one on the receiving end of a cease and desist letter and all of a sudden have to worry about whether or not they're infringing on someone else's patent and cough up all of their profits, to pay the other party's damages. So they'll hold on to patents on their own. Just so if someone sends them a cease and desist letter, they can say, look, we did our due diligence. We are patent owners too. So don't bother us. Another thing that companies can do is to take the patents and assert them. So if another company ends up copying their ideas or try to steal their products, they can then send a cease and desist letter and tell them, look, we are patent owners, that these are our ideas. The government has granted us the ability to use these ideas solely for the next 15 to 20 years. So you need to stop using and copying our products. And if they don't, then a lawsuit can ensue. And in an IP case, there's a thing called willful infringement, which means that if you can prove someone knew you were a patent owner and still continued infringing, they have to pay triple damages. So for every dollar they made off of copying your product, they have to pay you back 3 times. So that's a lot of money that you can end up getting from a patent infringement lawsuit. And then another way they can make money and monetize off of a patent is to license it. So they can come up with a licensing agreement with any companies that want to use their idea and collect royalties from those companies so they can use the idea and allow other people to use the idea and make money off of their profits. So lots of different ways for patent owners to monetize.
Given your experiences starting your own business and helping others start theirs, what does driving or adding value mean to you?
So adding value means that we are making a difference in a client's life or in a client's business. By assisting them with intellectual property needs, we're able to add value to their business. We talked about patents, but trademarks. Having a trademark increases the value of a company's brand by over 35%. Not having a trademark versus having a trademark, just that branding aspect of it is that much more valuable to a company. In terms of family law, there's even more value there because that value is priceless when you're able to have custody of your children and see your children and not go for days without them. If you're able to successfully mediate with an ex-spouse and get along with them and not be enemies co-parenting your children for the next 18 years, that is something you can't even put a price on. So the value that comes with family law is very different than in business law or IP law or anything that's just about money. This has to do with your mental health, your feelings, your relationships, and that you can't put a dollar value on.
I really appreciate the perspective you brought to this interview today, Elizabeth. I really enjoyed getting to hear your story and also seeing how you add value to your company. Thank you for again meeting with me today, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Let me introduce you to Sam Lytle. He is the current founder of Beyond CAD and former founder of Civil FX. And I just want to jump right into the questions today, Sam. When did you first think you wanted to start your own business?
Well, it actually was later for me than perhaps some entrepreneurs. I went to school for a long time, graduated in civil engineering, and it wasn't until I started sitting in cubicles and working as an engineer in training that I felt really discontented. I I quickly realized that engineering was probably not the best path for me because I'm more of a creative person. And so I felt a little bit trapped when I started my career. But fortunately, I started doing some 3D visualization, which kind of gave me insight into something that I could do in the engineering world since I just got my degree. And that's around that same time, I also started reading some business books and listening to some business podcasts. And that's kind of when it just clicked for me. It didn't feel like someone was telling me something new. It felt like someone was speaking my language, and it awakened something that was already within me. And that was about 10 years ago. That was in 2011. So shortly after I graduated college and I just entered my career, that's when I knew that someday I wanted to be my own boss and start businesses.
So now you have your startup that you're running, and what made you commit to that particular startup? What is it that kept you committed to that startup?
Well, I mean, there were a lot of other startups that either happened or they were ideas that didn't go very far. And so, I mean, the reason that I committed to that one is probably, I guess, twofold. One is because it was so closely tied to my career, my education. And so it was more of an all-in type thing. And then also it was the one that worked. You know, I had done some websites and tried to write books and tried to come up with inventions. And I just dabbled in all these little side ventures during that 4-year, let's get my experience period. And none of them had really taken off at all. And so with Civil FX, it was more of I'm quitting my job. I'm doing this full time. I'm using the credentials that I got through my education experience to do this. And so there was a lot more vested. There was a lot more risk involved in doing that. And in so doing, I was much more committed to make it work.
During that period of time, as you're starting this full time and you've left this career with a secure salary and benefits and whatnot, was there ever a feeling where you thought, I need to be ready to jump off if this is going to hurt me or my family, or I need to keep going, and how do I keep going?
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, I was pretty committed, and it wasn't as much a commitment to that specific idea of Civil FX or a visualization. Again, I knew it was a good idea, and it was tied to my education, which gave it some more value, but it was more a commitment to, I think I'm meant to be an entrepreneur, and I'm going to go down that path as much as I can and make that my career. And so there was, because I had a family and because I have things that are important to me in life other than just career and business and making money, there were things that I would not sacrifice in order to do that, especially just to make Civil FX work. But I was prepared to do whatever it took to not just to make Civil FX work, but to be an entrepreneur. And that manifested itself. I mean, it took at least a year or maybe 2 years for Civil FX to really get going to where it could provide for my family. And during that time, my wife worked somewhat, I worked somewhat, and eventually it started working to where it could provide for my family. So for me, it was a commitment to, I think I want to, and I need to be an entrepreneur. And how can I make that work long term? And let's not do anything in the interim that would ruin that path.
As you're building your first company, and you're trying to build your customer base, how did you build value into your product, and how did that affect your approach to your startup?
Yeah, I mean, visualization has been around for a very long time. I mean, it was like, hand drawings in the days of the pyramids, and it's evolved to, wireframe renderings and more realistic renderings. And so to just go out and say, I'm going to do visualization the same way it's done before, there's value because it's a small niche and there's not much of that in Nevada where I was working. But I knew that there was untapped potential in emerging technologies, especially in interactive technology. So the way the visualization had been done before was more like a movie production. You would set up your cameras, you would decide what would be seen, you would have a render farm, it would take a long time to render, and then you would deliver that video or image file. And I wanted to approach it more like a video game production. So it was like, let's turn this project into a video game, set up cameras later, and maybe even move around it interactively. And I have a brother in the industry. He's made video games for a long time, and I had some friends and contacts. And so that approach was the thing that actually helped us get traction. So we would deliver the image and video renders because that's what they were paying for and that's what was expected. But we would do it in a way where we were turning the project into video games using real-time game engines. And that's what set us apart. And that's where we started to change visualization in our industry here in Nevada. And then hopefully, maybe push the boundaries in other places as well.
So you have your first startup going and you're building your customer base. Was there a point where you felt like it was going to be okay? Like you thought this has really got enough traction to go?
I don't think I've ever experienced that point. I mean, there was a point where I went from, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay everyone next week to, okay, I think I can pay everyone this month. Next month's looking a little sketchy. And then eventually that timeline, that runway just extends out a little bit longer and you get better at managing that. And so that there never is a day, probably for any entrepreneur. I mean, maybe if you're a billionaire, or you've achieved some level of financial security, but it is, as you grow, it's not only your income grows, but your expenses grow as well. And so that runway, it doesn't expand out forever. It kind of just slowly expands out. But there were some periods, there were some inflection points where we either received big projects or we finished them and we started to get the money from them, where it was like, okay, we're to a new level. And that's kind of the points where like I hired a project manager. I mean, my education was in civil engineering. I was kind of interested in visualization, but wasn't trained as an artist. I was interested in business, but didn't have experience. And so I was finally able to hire a competitor in the industry, which was great. His name was Wayne, and he came on as a project manager. And then he was able to build a team. And that was one of the really important inflection points, because it went from just me and kind of a random group of contractors and part-time employees to like, okay, we have a team, we have a system, and we can reliably tell our clients, yes, we can do those big projects. And that's, looking back, that was one of the most important steps.
So I guess building on that question then was there some knowledge or a skill or maybe even an attitude that really made you think, I'm going to keep this going, I'm going to keep moving forward and make this successful?
Yeah, I mean, the moment where I knew we were moving forward and not backward was even before I hired a project manager. It's when we got Project Neon, which to this day is the largest infrastructure project in Nevada's history. It's over $1 billion, which for us is big. Not California. They do $1 billion projects before they wake up in the morning. But so once I got Project Neon and we started having success with that, I knew we were moving forward. I knew, that was something in the future was either going to be I was going to sell the business or I was going to keep growing it, but I wasn't going to quit it. And so it wasn't as difficult after then. It was just a matter of how can I expand it? How can I grow it? And how can I keep moving forward?
So you sold Civil FX to another company this last summer, correct?
Yes, Parametrics. We sold them in 2020 over Zoom during a pandemic, which is interesting.
And so now you could have done a lot of different things, and you chose to start a new company, Beyond CAD. What made you go down this path, and what made you want to start a new company again, I guess? I mean, I know you mentioned entrepreneurship was going to be your career, but why Beyond CAD?
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when we were selling the business where, I mean, my wife works. We could have taken that money and made decisions where it's like, let's move towards retirement or whatever retirement looks like, or let's move to a period where we have to work as little as possible because we have more money now than we used to have. But I mean, for one, we already had started the new software. We'd already started Beyond CAD. I had employees and we were moving forward. And two, we knew the momentum of what we were doing and the potential. I mean, Civil FX was a good idea. Beyond CAD was a great idea because now we're going from the services business to more of a product business, and not just product, but SaaS, which is software as a service, which can be, it's like Netflix or Spotify. You just start growing those subscribers and you can predict what the future is going to look like. It grows slowly over time. And so those are the things, some of the things that made it where like, we know this is where we need to go. But there are risks involved. And just one quick biblical story, there's the parable of the talents. And the one servant he got his talents and he buried them in the ground and he didn't do anything with them. And then, he was the slothful servants. And so we're trying to take the talent that we had and invest it and expand it into more talents and be wise with it. It's kind of like, if you're given a bunch of seeds, pumpkin seeds, you could eat them because they taste good, or you could plant them more. And maybe there will be a day where there's more pumpkin seeds than you can ever eat. And so we know the risks. When I say we, my wife and I, we know the risks involved in taking a lot of that money and investing it in a new company, because the company might not work. It might go away. But like you mentioned, I signed up for entrepreneurship, and that's where I'm going. But also we know the potential that is involved with this sort of thing. I feel confident about the specific product and the problems that it's solving.
What lessons did you gain from your first business that you were applying to your second business?
Yeah, well, even more than lessons, I have more knowledge, I have more contacts, and I have more money than I did the first time around. And so there are a lot of advantages involved. And one of the lessons that I'm learning because of those other advantages is, I alluded to the long-term view. And that's something that I reiterate, not just to myself, but to my team all the time. When they ask me a question, when they say, hey, should I do this or this? I say, what would be best long-term? And they say, well, this would be better, but I have to rewrite all the code. I'm going to have to do all this stuff. And they say, no, do that, because I feel like I've earned the advantage to have more of a runway. And I think that's going to help us long-term. And it also hopefully it helps my team build confidence too, that I'm not just trying to build another company and flip it quick, or trying to milk a market or a product. Like, I really want to make something that will change an industry, and I want to build a good company. And so by just having that long-term view, it helps. I think it's going to help. I know it's going to help our product, but I hope it will also help my team see what I really want, what's really important to me, and not make me feel either desperate, like I need to do these things because I need money right now, or because I want money right now, or make them feel like they're not in a stable situation. So, and that's one thing that I think about a lot, is the well-being of my employees. I'm not Google. I can't offer my employees the same level of benefits and security that someone else could, but I can offer them some autonomy. I can offer them, I don't care where they work. I don't care when they work. We're a remote company, and I support them. I just had an employee decide he wanted to go off and kind of do his own thing. And since I've been in that situation before, I reacted maybe different than most people would expect. And I said, you know what? I support you in that. If you need an investor, if you need a supporter, whatever you need from me, let me help you in that. And I think that helped build rapport. And now he's helping me as a contractor part-time. And so I do whatever I can to make their lives better, because I think that's going to help long-term the product and the industry that we're trying to change.
Well, thank you, Sam, for your time in this interview. I appreciate the time you took to visit with me today.
Thanks, Kenneth.
I'm excited to bring to you a perspective from someone who's not only had experience as an entrepreneur, but also currently is an investor. Kiem Tjong is a member of the Pasadena Angels Group. And Kiem, my first question for you today is, what led you to become an angel investor?
So at this stage in my business and my life, I'm looking back and I want to give back to society, to my community. I would like to help entrepreneurs who are now at that stage that I was at 20 years ago or so. And one of the ways you can do that is by being an angel investor, because angel investing doesn't only mean investing money in startups. It often also means that you provide entrepreneurs with advice, of course, if they want the advice. But it's always useful for an entrepreneur to have somebody there who can hopefully help that entrepreneur avoid making the same mistakes that I made and some of my partners. And I say that because time is a really important commodity to entrepreneurs, not only money. And if you have to make all your mistakes and go on the learning curve all on your own, then that you don't want to lose all that time. So having angels around you that can help you avoid the pitfalls of growing your company, that can give you other things of value, like making introductions to potential customers, that is all. That's all stuff that is really useful to beginning entrepreneurs. And so that's one of the reasons that I'm an angel investor. And then another reason is that, and it's probably a little bit more particular to me, is that it gives me a chance to stay involved with different technologies. Technology is my background. I started as an engineer, and I'm still involved with technology, but it's really difficult for one person to stay abreast of everything that's happening out there in the different technology sectors. But if you invest in multiple companies that cover a range of different technologies, and that's a way for somebody like me to stay informed, maybe in a little bit of a general sense, but it gives me the security of at least having the idea that I know what's going on in this big world of ours.
So my next question for you, it might seem basic, but why would an entrepreneur want to pitch their idea to an angel investor?
If you have the kind of business where you can start servicing your customer right away, and you can get customers very soon, and those customers pay you, you may never need money, from outsiders. And I think that's one reason why there are so many companies in the US that never took angel funding. But there are businesses that really do need angel funding. For example, if you have thought of a product, a really innovative product, unique, first of its kind, and there are customers willing to pay for that product, you need to, first of all, you need to design the product, you need to build the product, you need to test the product, you need to market and promote the product before you can start selling the first unit to your customers. So you will need a pretty good chunk of money to get to that stage. And that's not all. When you get to the stage where you can sell product to your customers, you know what will happen next in many cases? You will get competition that pops up on the horizon. So now you, as the entrepreneur, you now have to deal with these other companies that are trying to make products similar to yours. And they may have decent budgets, so maybe they can get up and running pretty fast. And they're going to try to take your customers away. And you don't want to give them a chance to do that. So what do? You accelerate your pace, you speed it up. And for that, you need more money. So I would say those are the two main reasons that entrepreneurs come to us for money. So again, they need money up front for capital equipment, for overall development money, and they need money to speed up to get to market. By the way, the phase that we call where you're speeding up, it's often called scaling up. So that's a term you will hear more often when you deal with investors. They want to know if your business can scale up, and that means can your company ramp up your product in a more accelerated fashion. And all designed, of course, to stay ahead of the competition.
You kind of touched on this in that answer there, but I want to ask, is there a time when it's too early to seek angel investment funds or too late?
Oh, yes, that is true. There's definitely a stage in the whole funding process that we angel investors fit in. If you are the kind of company that needs angel investment, you will typically need multiple rounds of funding. Most of those come after the angel investment stage. But most likely you will need one or more before you get to us. And one reason for that is that we angel investors, we do not invest in a concept or an idea. We invest in businesses that have already grown around such a concept. They have maybe developed a product, maybe not the final stage of a product like that, maybe an early stage, a prototype, something that is called an MVP, which stands for minimum viable product. It's basically an early functional model of your product that you can use to start attracting customers. And we like to see you have customers, ideally paying customers. Now, maybe you didn't have the resources or money to get to the stage where you have fully paying customers. Maybe they are customers who are not paying you, but they are using your product. So that is a good sign. That's a positive sign that we want to see. If you have the kind of product that you cannot easily charge customers for, like if you have, like a YouTube or a Facebook kind of product, then we want to see how many users you have. And we would like to see how you have been ramping up, the number of users over time.
That makes sense that someone would only come to you after they have their MVP and some traction with customers. So what would you recommend are sources of funding prior to coming to seeking angel investment funds?
When you're very, very early, nobody knows you. Typically, you will get money from people that know you, like friends and family members. And that's why we call this the friends and family round or friends and family funding stage. Maybe you have a rich uncle or other rich family members who can help you out with that. And what if you don't have any family members with money? There are some other ways you can get money early on. There are, for example, pitch events or pitch fests. A lot of the universities these days, they have annual pitch events, and many of them offer money to the winner. Sometimes even the number 2 and 3, the companies that make it into the number 2 and 3 slot. So now you have a little bit of money that you can use to develop the prototype, right? We have seen companies come pitch in front of us that had accumulated quite a bit of money from winning or scoring well in multiple pitch events.
When you're deliberating about which opportunities to fund, what are some of the important considerations you're making to help you make that decision?
If you have taken a class or a boot camp in how to present to investors, you've probably learned that you want to compose a pitch deck, a slide deck. And each of those slides covers a particular topic. And that's what we investors typically discuss after your pitch. We discuss some of those topics, and we talk amongst ourselves on how well each of those is covered. Not so much on how you present it, as much as how much attention we think you paid to all of those different bullet items. So, for example, there is going to be a page that covers your team. It's going to be called team, executive team, or founders, or entrepreneurs, something like that. But that is going to cover who you are, what your background is, who your co-founders are, who else is on your team. We want to see if you have, for example, if you have experience in a field. Now, if you are, let's say, you just graduated from college and you haven't had a chance to get experience in that field, maybe you can add some senior members to your team that have an experience. Or maybe you can invite people who are really experienced in that field to be advisors on your board. Something else we're looking for is if you have multiple founders, have you worked together before? We're looking for a little bit of synergy, a little bit of, or maybe a lot of chemistry among the founders, because you will be working together very closely and probably very hard. So it helps to know each other. There's going to be a slide, of course, on your product. What kind of product do you have? How good is it? Is there a way that you can protect that product with filing for a patent? Or can you, if it's software, for example, it's usually not that useful to file for patents, but you want to make sure you keep your code a secret, of course. You want to make sure that you have a good market for your product, because you may have a really great product, but maybe there's not that many people that want to buy it. Or maybe there's not that many companies that are willing to pay the price for your product that allows you to make a profit on that product, because it's going to cost you a certain amount of money to make the product, and then can you sell it for enough money for you to make a profit? We would like to see a slide on your competition, the competitive landscape. Actually, I shouldn't say we would like to. I would say we have to see a slide on that.
I thought it was interesting that you started off the response to my last question about discussing the importance of the team and communicating that during your pitch. I wonder, is there a difference between how you consider the quality of the pitch and the quality of the team doing the pitching?
You know, there is an expression among some angel investors, which is a reference to betting on horse races. We say sometimes, do you bet on a jockey or do you bet on the horse? And you know what's behind that is, do you bet on the entrepreneur, that's a jockey, or do you bet on the product, which is the horse? And you are going to find disagreements among angel investors, but by and large, my group and myself included, and it's something that I have come to believe in a little bit more strong fashion as I have spent more time in the investing field. We believe that the jockey is more important than the product most of the time. And the reason for that is that it's really hard to grow a company. And almost all startup companies are going to go through tough times. And how well you can weather those tough times is going to depend more on the entrepreneur than on the product. So if you are the entrepreneur, it's going to help if you are resilient, resourceful, creative, if you can show that you can lead your team through those tough times. So yeah, for many of us, there is definitely a distinction between who's pitching and what is being pitched.
And for my final question, Kiem, are there any general tips that you would want to share with someone who is preparing to pitch to an angel investor group?
Don't say that you don't have any competition. That's usually a red flag for us. If you have no competition, really, that means that maybe you shouldn't be in that field. Okay, maybe there's no demand for your product. Now, I know there really are entrepreneurs who really believe they have no competition because nobody has really built a product like your product, right? I mean, nobody out there has the exact number of features that your product has. So you're tempted to really, in all honesty, say that no, you don't have competition. There's nobody out there with exactly the same product, but that's not what we're looking for. If you really believe that, okay, just assume this. Go out there when you are composing your competitive slide and look for companies that produce something similar. It's not the same thing as you, but it is similar. And put those on your competition slide and put a note with each of them as to how different they are from you, or why you stand out, or how you can differentiate yourself, and all of those different features compared to your competition. Another thing I would advise is that if we ask you a question in the Q&A session after your pitch and you don't know the answer, don't try to guess it, don't fake it. Just be, forthright and just say, I'm sorry, I don't have the answer right now, but I'm happy to look it up as soon as I can and report back to you on that. So that's really the kind of answer we're looking for. We are looking for honesty in our entrepreneurs. Another thing that I would recommend is get to know our formats. Every angel group has typically a different process for looking at the entrepreneurs and deciding who gets most of our attention, who gets most of our time when we get more serious about the final presentation phase. And another thing I would really recommend to you is try to get to know us way before you think you are going to be pitching to us. So let's say you think you're going to be ready to pitch to us half a year from now. Maybe now is the time to find one of us and get a dialogue going with that person, or maybe there's more of us.
Thank you, Kiem, so much for your time today and for the perspective you brought and for the tips that you provided. Hopefully this will encourage some people to come up with some great ideas and be some of your future customers.
It would be great. Thank you, Kenneth.
So for our final speaker today, I want to introduce you to Chris Thornham. He's an entrepreneur and former founder of Flow Cycling. He's currently building a new company as a writer and a software developer. So Chris, we've had the opportunity to hear from a variety of speakers, and I would like to get your perspective on some of their thoughts. For example, from Gary, we heard a really great story where he had a special client who needed to get dialysis treatment in a faraway city. And when he asked for volunteers, he got 3 people in his company willing to sacrifice their time to drive the 224-mile round-trip journey. So how does one build the right kind of team for their organization?
This is a really great question, because I think your team is critically important. And if you do a really good job picking a great team, if you don't do a good job picking a good team, then it can really, really hold you back. So when it comes to picking great teams, I think there are 4 things that I like to focus on. And the first thing is to hire self-starters. And to describe what I mean by that, I think it helps to start by explaining what a non-self-starter is. So you can think of a non-self-starter as the type of person who never takes initiative. Now, this doesn't mean that they're not good at doing exactly what they're told. It just means that they freeze up anytime they have to think for themselves. So to give you an example, if a non-starter doesn't know the answer to a certain question, then they don't try to solve it on their own. Instead, they wait for someone else to try to tell them exactly how to do it. And I think the biggest problem with this is that you end up guiding them through most of their work, which defeats the entire purpose of hiring them in the first place. Now, by comparison, I look at self-starters as people who take initiative. They're the problem solvers and the type of people who take pride in their work. And the best thing about self-starters is that pretty much all they need to do their job is an objective. And as long as they know what their goal is, then they can figure out how to get there mostly on their own. And, they're going to have questions along the way, but you're not going to have to do a lot of hand-holding. So the reason this is so valuable is because they're able to get the job done almost entirely on their own, which takes the work off of your plate. And that's the exact reason you hire someone to begin with. The second thing that I think is critical when building a team is to give your employees what they need. And I say this because I think few things hold an employee back more than not giving them the tools and the training that they need to succeed. So for this, I'll give you a bit of a personal example. I worked a very technical engineering job once, selling and designing commercial HVAC equipment for about 3 years. And in the first 2 years I worked there, I had 3 different positions. Now, for the longest time, I always felt like I was behind. I struggled with our internal software, and I never really felt confident making certain design decisions. And then about 2 years into that job, I found out that my boss had cheaped out and tried to save money by not sending me to the training that new employees were supposed to get. So in his foolish attempt to try and save money, he ended up costing himself a lot more. And that's because he was cutting corners with all of his employees, not just me. And basically, by not giving us the training that we needed, we couldn't excel at our jobs. And then to add to this point, I think if you hire a self-starter and you don't give them what they need to succeed, then you're taking their ability away to be a self-starter, which kind of makes all of your problems just exponentially worse over time. So the main thing here is before you hire people, make sure you spend the time needed to build effective training programs. And yes, this is a big workload in the beginning, but in the long run, it really pays off. The third thing that I think is important for building great teams is I always say, just let them fly. And look, if you're hiring someone, then I hope that you feel confident that they are, one, capable of doing their job, and two, responsible enough to get it done. So every time I've ever hired someone, I've made a few things really, really clear. And the first is that, look, they're an adult, right? And I trust that they're going to get their job done. And honestly, how they do that is really up to them. And then the second thing I do is I explain what I need them to get done, and I provide them with a rough timeline for when I hope those things can be accomplished. And then after that, it's pretty simple. I just say, look, if you do a good job, then you're going to hear from me. And if you don't do a good job, you're also going to hear from me, but we're going to be having a different conversation. And then after that, I let them do their job. Now, this doesn't mean they can't come to me with questions or ask for guidance, because that's always welcome. You know, if you're a business owner, you have to have that option available. But what this says is, it says, I hired you because I trust you and because I think you're capable. And I believe that when you give self-starters this message, they feel trusted and they feel respected. And then as a result, they take pride in their work and they develop a very powerful level of responsibility. And I think that goes a long way. Because the opposite approach to this is when you micromanage people. And by doing that, you're sending a very, very different message. You're saying, I don't think you're capable. I don't trust you to do your job. And no matter what you do, it's never going to be good enough. And I think when you send that message to a self-starter, it causes them to lose faith in their abilities. And as a result, that just weakens your entire team. My final piece of advice for building good teams is to get rid of the wrong people quickly. Now, look, I know firing people is never easy, but I think if you set up the onboarding process like I described, then the wrong people will quickly weed themselves out. Because if people have the tools and the training that they need, they have a clear understanding of what is expected of them. And then, after that, there really should be no reason why they can't get their job done. And if they can't, then I don't think that's the kind of person you want to have on your team. Because if you keep these people on, the entire business suffers. First, that position suffers. Any employee who relies on that person suffers. And then as the business owner, you'll also suffer, because there's a good chance you'll just end up doing the work that you hired them to do in the first place. So I think the key point here is, if you find someone who is incapable of doing their job, then don't hesitate, let them go and find someone who can get the job done. So I made 4 points, and just to summarize those quickly, I'd say for building a good team, I would say you hire capable people who are self-starters. You give them every opportunity to succeed by providing them with the tools and training that they need. You give them clear objectives. You keep the people who succeed, and you replace the ones who don't.
One of the things that I think stand out to me is obviously having the courage to let people go who are not succeeding, but also realizing if you're not providing what they need, there's an issue there with you that needs to be corrected. Absolutely. From Elizabeth Yang, we heard a little bit about her personal experiences with divorce and how that motivated her to get experience in family law and expand her practice. And also from Sam Lytle, he discussed how his experience in the civil engineering profession allowed him to see the need for better visualization tools. So I'm curious your perspective on how we can use our personal experiences to create value for our customers.
Yeah. So you said the word value, And I think that value is one of the most important things that you should have on your mind as an entrepreneur. And that's because customers ultimately pay for value. And when you think about it, if you strip any successful company or product down, you'll see that it's providing value in some way. Now, that could be entertainment, it could be making something easier or saving time and money. But at the end of the day, in some way, it's providing value. So when it comes to using your personal experience to create value, I think the best way that you can do that is by identifying your personal pain points. So let me give you an example. If you're running a business or you have experience and you recognize that something is hard to do, so maybe something takes a lot of time to complete and it's wasting a lot of your day, then that kind of signal should act as a clue or a hint that there might be an opportunity to provide value in that area. So if you look at Sam's example from above, he realized that there was no good visualization tools, which is something that is clearly valuable. And then he built a solution to that problem. Now, as a quick side note on this topic, I think the whole experience part of this is also really important. And I say that because so many entrepreneurs start with an idea for a business, but they end up with a completely different business model when they're done. And I think that's because before people get started, they often have no idea what will and what will not work. And unless they get their hands dirty, then they don't really know what problems even exist. So, even if you think about it, most of the major accomplishments throughout history have followed this pattern of experimentation, failure, and then learning from that failure. That's how Edison built the light bulb. It's how the Wright brothers learned to fly. And if you think of a modern day example, that's how Instagram started, right? Like they started as this whiskey app. And then they realized that didn't work. But what people loved was the picture aspect and the filters. So they just said, well, let's just make a picture app. And everyone knows that story. It was very successful. So I think the main takeaway here is, to get your hands dirty, find problems that need to be solved, solve them, and then provide those new valuable solutions to your customers.
So speaking of Sam again, he presented us with a challenge that many startups face, which is starting a business is difficult. There's phases of it that are very challenging and really question whether or not you want to stay with the business. In Sam's case, he talked about focusing on value and adding value to his product and working with his customers to get feedback to make sure that he wasn't just some crazy person with a dream. So passing through these moments can be a significant challenge for most anybody. What are some perspectives that can help someone be more resilient in the future?
That's a great question. A successful entrepreneur once told me that nothing in business lasts forever. And I think that's very true because there's always new technologies, new competitors, and there's even different eras. Just think of how we went from the Industrial Revolution to the computer revolution, and something else is going to be next. Now, let's take the current landscape with COVID. I think that we've seen many industries show just how vulnerable they are. And I believe, if anything, that this change in the world has only accelerated the expected successful lifespan of a lot of successful businesses. So in some cases, COVID has even made successful companies almost obsolete overnight. So while it's impossible to look into the future with perfect clarity and to predict what's going to happen, I do believe that there are a couple of things that you can do to help make you less vulnerable in the future and to prevent yourself from working really hard with little or no benefit. And the first thing that I've always said is I think people should think ahead. And I know this sounds obvious, but I had another really successful entrepreneur tell me once that the day you release your new product is the day that it's outdated. And I know this feels rather defeating, especially if you've spent months or years developing something, but it's true. And I think if you're not continually figuring out what's next, that you can easily fall into the trap of working really hard on what's working right now. And the big problem with this is, like I've already said, that nothing in business lasts forever. So if you put all of your effort into your current product, then eventually you'll be left with nothing when that product is no longer relevant. So I think the best way to prevent this problem is to always be developing your next product. So basically, from the day you release your new product, you should be thinking about the next new product. And while you do this, I think there's a lot of value in thinking about how the world is changing and how those changes might affect your business and the next generation of your products. So I'll give you a quick small analogy on this. Like, I started college in the year 2000 and I chose to study mechanical engineering. Now, if I had taken the time to think about the future and where the world was going, I probably could have concluded that computers were going to be the next big thing. But I was young and naive, and of course I didn't do that, right? And as a result, I took a mechanical engineering degree at the end of the Industrial Revolution, when I probably would have been better off getting a computer engineering degree at the beginning of the computer revolution. Anyway, to recap that point, the main point here is, look, just always try to be thinking ahead and what's coming up next in your business. And then the second thing that I think you can do to future-proof yourself is to diversify. And I think that diversification really helps when, completely unexpected things happen. So to take COVID, for example, if you had all of your eggs in the commercial real estate basket, then you probably encountered a huge loss. But if your business was diversified and commercial real estate was only a portion of your revenue stream, then yes, of course, that loss would have been painful, but it wouldn't have completely taken you out of the game. So if you're designing, your business and your product line, try to design a selection of products that can live on their own, independent of each other. And then that way, if something crazy happens and you lose one of your product lines, you don't lose them all. And I think with this type of business structure, that you can really weather some pretty crazy storms.
Something that stands out to me from Kiem's interview is how angel investors look at both the person pitching the idea as well as the idea being pitched to evaluate whether or not they want to invest money there. So how can somebody who's been really focused on refining their idea and building their business show that they are improving themselves and still be successful in these pitches?
Yeah. So I touched on this a little bit before, but I think one of the most valuable skills that you can have as an entrepreneur is the ability to accept your failures and then to use those failures as an opportunity to learn so you can improve moving forward. And the big reason I say this is because the baseline for entrepreneurship is pretty much failure. And I know that sounds a bit bleak, but until you become successful, by default, you're kind of at the level of failure. And what's even more important for entrepreneurs to understand is that making this binary switch, if you will, from failure to success it's really hard to do. And if you aren't very comfortable with failure, and if you aren't aware of the value in failure, then you're going to have a hard time succeeding as an entrepreneur. Now, when it comes to angel investors, I think a lot of them want to know that you can fail gracefully and then make wise decisions to get yourself back on track. Because like I said, that process is really the pattern of entrepreneurship. And I know if somebody had my money, that I wouldn't want them to get so stuck in their ways and caught up in their ego that they couldn't admit that they had failed. Because if someone can't admit that they failed, then it's almost impossible for them to move ahead. Now, I've actually got a bit of an interesting story that kind of ties this point together. I'd say probably 8 or 10 years ago, there was a tech startup in Vegas that got this huge investment from a very well-known angel investor. And this company used to host parties for other entrepreneurs, kind of like a meetup. So I got invited and I decided to go. So I get there and there's one of the first things I learned is that this company had basically rented out and taken over a couple floors of an entire apartment building in Las Vegas. So they were renting all the rooms for their employees. They had conference rooms, they had party rooms, catering, like the whole 9 yards. And you could see that these guys were definitely spending a ton of money. So naturally, I'm thinking, well, these guys must also be making a lot of money. Anyway, the CEO is there, and I guess you could say that he was a bit of an interesting guy. And I think his general idea was that he wanted to give off the impression that he was important and that you would be lucky to have the opportunity to talk to him. And, for most of the night, he had this line of people waiting to talk to him. So I ended up spending the majority of my night talking with a lot of the engineers who worked at the company. And one of the first questions I asked was, could I see a demo of their product? And then that led to this endless account of how many problems their product had and how they couldn't show me a demo because they couldn't get it to work. Now, I was pretty new as an entrepreneur at the time, but it didn't take a lot of foresight to realize that a company without a viable product was a big problem, especially for a company that was spending at the rate that they were spending. So after the line to the CEO to speak with him eventually died down, I walked over to hear what he had to say about the company. And he probably spent like 5 minutes or more telling me about how his company, or the main goal for his company, was to have 1,000 employees. And in that conversation, he never once mentioned the product or how they plan to make money, because all this guy cared about was building this giant company. Anyway, I left the party feeling kind of bad for the angel investor, because this guy's inability to recognize and learn from failure would ultimately mean the demise of the company. And I mean, one, like, it didn't seem like he could admit that their product was a failure, because it was. They couldn't show me a demo. And then two, he didn't seem willing to be able to accept that his plan to build a huge company before making it profitable was a bad idea. And in the long run, my intuition was right, because if you look that company up today, like, you can find nothing on them online. So I think one of the thing that you can do to become valuable to an angel investor is be humble enough to learn from failure, and then illustrate that you can use those lessons learned to improve moving forward.
Thank you for those perspectives, Chris. I have one last question for you in the last little bit that we've got here, which is, what should an entrepreneur at this stage, meaning the survival stage, focus their energy on over the next 365 days?
So look, I'm going to give you a little bit of a probably counterintuitive answer to this question, and this is going to be aimed a little bit more towards a new entrepreneur. But if you're a new entrepreneur, I would say that you should treat the next 365 days as an experiment. And I say that because if you become an entrepreneur, the advice that I'm going to give you for the next year is also the same advice that I would give you for the next 20 years. And that is, never stop learning and improving. Now, here's why I say you should spend the next 365 days as an experiment. Because, you hear a lot of things online that suggest anyone can start their own business and become an entrepreneur. But I think in general that that's bad advice. And I say that because entrepreneurship is hard, right? And when you're an entrepreneur, there's always something else to do. You're never done. And like I've said, the day you release your new product, it's already outdated. And that same logic really applies to almost every facet of your business. So to keep up with running a successful company, you have to be in love with always having something else to do and learning and figuring things out. Because if you're not, the whole process of entrepreneurship is going to be a pretty miserable experience. I mean, look, I've been an entrepreneur for 15 years, and while I'm still learning and improving every day, and I think I just sold a company, right? And that was great, and it was exciting. But now I'm building a new company, and I'm still putting in 10 to 15 hours every day. And like I've said, you have to make a lot of sacrifices to make that happen. I've given up time with friends and family. I've missed a lot of sleep and vacations, and I rarely get a weekend off. Now, that comes with a lot of benefits, but there is a payoff for it. So here, look, if you treat the next 365 days as your trial period for entrepreneurship. And if you realize that what I'm describing is something that you love, then keep going. But if not, then I think that's perfectly okay, because giving up a good portion of your life for work isn't for anyone, or for everyone, right? And if you realize that entrepreneurship is not for you, then the best advice I can give you would be to get a job you love, or at least like, enjoy your weekends, and start a 401k.
Well, Chris Thornham, thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure visiting with you and hearing your thoughts on our segment today.
Of course, I'm honored to be here. I can't thank you enough for having me.